It's going to be an interesting conversation on that one because like all my notes are like, well, if I was the DM, but this isn't a D&D game. But is it?
It feels it.
I was digging for information. I found information about the source material. I have no information about the production itself.
It was so tough. Like there's nothing there.
Yeah.
It's because it's trapped in the world of magic.
That makes sense.
We're thinking too logically.
Mm-hmm. That's what it is.
To find the information.
If you're trying to use logic to find information, you're not going to find it.
Welcome to Certain POVs, Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam, where we take another look at movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Let's see how we could have fixed them.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And today we are going to try to suss out the difference between fact and fantasy, because today we are digging back into the roots of my childhood love of fantasy, and we are going to be discussing the 1982 Rankin and Bass animated, in my opinion, classic, but I understand that a lot of people haven't heard of it, The Flight of Dragons. And for that conversation, we are joined by Joe Mastropiero.
Hello.
Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad that we've been connecting online in general, that you've become a very active part of our Discord community for our tabletop discussions, and for wanting to do some fantasy stuff, because we were kind of in that mode, because, you know, the Dungeons and Dragons movie just opened this past week, the week that we are recording this. You know, podcast time is weird. Mm-hmm. So we were definitely in that kind of vibe. And just tell people a little bit about yourself.
My name's Joe. I am a stay-at-home dad, and when I'm not trying to wrangle my 9-year-old son, I'm just enjoying life and trying to build some TTRPGs and living, just enjoying myself.
And that sounds great. That's living the dream, as far as I'm concerned.
Being a stay-at-home parent definitely has its ups and downs.
Yeah, as someone who has recently joined, not the stay-at-home part, but the parent side of things, it's I can imagine what many of those ups and downs are.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Baby chaos reigns supreme.
Oh, yes.
But I am looking forward to, as my daughter gets older and older, to introducing her to all kinds of animated movies. And I'm definitely going to include this one.
Yes.
This is a movie, when you suggested it, I was like, oh, fuck, yeah, I remember that movie. I loved that movie. And Sam hadn't seen that movie, but I was like pumped about it because I remembered specific details. And I realized when I was watching it, it was like, oh, this is the exact kind of nerd that I am. And also the exact kind of character I always play in a D&D game.
Honestly, when I was watching this movie, I was like, if Case were a movie.
Yes, exactly.
Like, I was just like, this is like such a Case movie. There are times where it gets drawn on far too long and you're like, okay, you've gone on a tangent now. And then there are times where there's like action and like that's very Case. And then there are just times where you're like, wait, what? Why? Okay, yep, that's nerdy. Go on.
Yep. Yeah, no, there's dick and fart drinking jokes in this movie. There's like a lot of death in this movie.
So
there's a zombie wolf at one point.
Yeah.
Who's a good guy?
Dude, he is amazing. I will broke. There will be no slander.
There's no slander.
Except of his dumb name.
Yes.
Yeah, no, terrible names. It's definitely someone on the spot being like, fuck, Gorbash as a name.
Gorbash is actually technically one of the better names of this film.
Also true.
Yeah.
Also true. There's a lot of craziness going on in this all. There's James Earl Jones, the voice of the main villain, which is amazing.
So good.
Yeah, like this is exactly the kind of PC I play, even when I'm playing like smooth, cool characters or like stoic knights or even barbarians. Like I can't help but be like, but wait, how does physics work for this thing?
Oh yeah,
like that's, and I realized like this movie might be like all of that for me, because like so thinking about this movie, and I was like, I really distinctly remember two particular scenes like before I like started watching the movie, which was specifically being taught how to fly, or being taught like how the dragon breath works in relation to how they fly, where it was like, oh, okay, so they eat minerals and they break it down. And I remember like the whole, like you have stones in your like gullet thing to like do all that. And it's like, oh, this is really cool. And like fill up a sack of hydrogen, and like the fire is just like a byproduct of it all. Like I remember that exact scene. And then I remembered the fact that one of the ways that he wins at the end is by explaining the physics of where the sun's position is versus our ability to see it.
Yeah.
And I knew before I even started watching this movie, like, oh, these are the things that are all about me, where it's like the like the nerdy cross section of science and fantasy and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because when I'm a DM for Dungeons and Dragons, the things I am DMing are always like set piece stuff where I'm like, here's the application of this magic thing, but going off of a physics thing. So it's like, here's a magic treasure, like Boots of Lightning or something like that. But it's all in this like muck of shallow water, and you get electrocuted every time you touch it until so you have to get it out. Those kind of like set pieces. Or like I had one where here's a big iron tunnel that they're in, and they have boots with lodestone so that they have to like walk on the walls. Like, so using science and then magic together is always like really exciting for me. And that is this movie. Like that is exactly what this movie is, because it's just a fucking D&D game, but with like a nerd DM.
Oh, yeah.
So Joe, since you were the one who suggested it, what was your association with this movie? Like, when did you first come across it?
I watched all the Rankin and Bass films when I was a kid, as I was a big nerd and into fantasy, and my father was a big nerd into fantasy. So I'm pretty sure we owned the book Flight of Dragons. I know we had like tons of dragon textbooks and books on heroes and monsters, because my dad was huge into that stuff. So it just got me into that frame of mind. So I've been watching movies like this since I was a little kid.
Nice. Yeah, I want to hunt down that book now, because it looks super interesting. So for people at home who are not familiar with this 1982 obscure TV movie, the movie is kind of sort of based on two different books. The name, The Flight of Dragons, comes from a book, The Flight of Dragons, which is a pseudo-scientific breakdown of how dragons function, which I think is amazing. I love all those kind of books. Like, I have all those, like, After Humans, or like like the dinosaurs, like if the the K2E event never occurred, like the like if the Cretaceous period instead. Yeah, exactly. Like, what would they look like in the current like geographic landmass space? Like those are so cool. I love all of those.
Yeah, I love speculative evolution, speculative biology. I'm huge on that. Like, while I was doing a little research on the movie we watched, I remembered that there's another thing that based themselves off Flight of the Dragons. There was like this British BBC dragon documentary where they used that book as well to kind of build it, but in much more of like a realistic like science documentary style, which is pretty neat.
So that book by Peter Dickinson is this fake textbook on how dragons work. So that's the name, and that's where a lot of the nerdiest stuff in this movie comes from. And then it also comes from a book series by Gordon R. Dixon, not to be confused with Dickinson, called The Dragon and the George, which at the time when this movie came out was the only book in the series. It has since gone on to have like 11 books, which is like remarkable considering like the timetable on it. It was like 76 was that book, and then like 1990 was then the start of the rest of the series, and then just kept on going.
Yeah, I'm going to have to try to snag them, because I've never taken a look at them.
Yeah, and I like skim through like summaries about like the differences and like what's going on in there. Clearly there's a lot of similarities, because that's where the actual story is coming from. But then they have this like extra meta element where they decide to change the main character to be literally Peter Dickinson, the author of The Flight of Dragons.
Let's just throw the author in the movie. Let's throw the book in there. It's amazing.
So it's John Ritter, and like it's wonderful. I love the fact that when like later in the movie, when he is merged with the Dragon Gorbash, there's kind of a Two's Company situation going on here, which is just like fun for me.
Oh yeah,
poor Gorbash. Like, his body was being used and he didn't even realize. Go on.
I know yeah, but I mean, at least to everyone's credit, it wasn't intentional.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And like they very quickly are like, no, he's here. He's like literally just asleep. I can feel him.
Yeah, he's back there.
Yeah, that was all good. And like Gorbash was already, it's not like Gorbash went on the quest with them, that he was going to go on that quest anyway.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They like commandeered his body.
Gorbash was down for the quest. So.
Yeah. Like a little too down, frankly. He was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, he was like, let's do this.
Finally get to do something. But like, honestly, like, I feel bad because he missed everything. It's like,
that's true. Maybe he'll remember it.
Stoked for the journey, and then like you wake up and you're like,
it's over.
Hey, it's my buddy. He's alive. Wait, what are you talking about, Sir Peter? Oh well.
Yeah.
So when we're gonna go do that thing?
At least he didn't lose out on being the actual hero in those moments. Like, it's not like because Peter is freed from him for the actual confrontation with Omadon.
Mhm.
So like, it's not like Gorbash has to be like, oh, wait, hold on, Peter did that instead of me. Like basically, Peter
Yeah.
just took over him walking.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So like, you know, that's not too bad. So there's this meta element of it being Peter Dickinson, who is English and not from Boston. And I
Mhm.
don't like, it's even weirder where it's like, okay, so it's like kind of sort of we're pretending that the author of one of the books sort of. And I was like, oh, well, maybe Gordon Dixon is. And no, he's from Canada.
Not that it's doing Boston for no good reason.
Right. Like,
Yeah, they just
And it doesn't have a Boston
Why
accent. No
not?
one has a Boston accent,
no.
No.
you know?
no one.
So,
but he is trying to join the English like
yes, the Dragon Society of England.
Yeah.
So like, you know, there's a nod to England.
Yeah, yeah.
Get off his
I-
case.
No, I'm just saying, how amazing would it be like if they had leaned into the Boston thing or the British thing or the
One of the-
Canadian thing? Because
Uh-huh.
like if he was like, man, flying's wicked hot, eh?
Imagine for the whole movie. He's just-
Gorbash.
Gorbash.
Or if he's super Canadian and he's like,
Yeah,
oh,
right.
sorry about that.
Oh, dragons.
No. Why did I have to breathe fire?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Get used to this body. Oh, man. And, you wouldn't even know it's Boston except for the throwaway line where he's like, too bad I'm in Boston.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Like they go really hard on that.
Uh-huh. Oh, man.
It's like the old comic book shorthand of like no smoking in this whatever building they're supposed to be in
Mhm.
as a as a way of just like being super clear like where they are.
Yeah. The points that they want to hammer, they really hammer.
Yeah, so like the science stuff, I super hardcore remember. And then you watch the movie, and like when I say it's a D&D quest, I mean it's a D&D quest. Like there are 4 wizard brothers, one of whom is like fuck people, and the other 3 are like no, but people, no,
But people,
Yeah.
though.
and they're not allowed to fight. So they're like, well, let's assemble some champions and have them go into Mordor.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, not Mordor, Omadon's
Yeah.
lair.
To get a different circular wearable object.
Right, exactly. It's like here's some magic items, and we're gonna get your paladin, and we're gonna get your ranger
Mhm.
and
Your
your
thief.
elf, because this is
Yeah.
still like
Oh, yeah, it's elf, not
like-
thief or anything.
yeah, this is
Mhm.
still AD&D era.
Yep.
And then they're like, okay, well, what about the last champion? Oh, it should be like a leader from this whole thing. Oh, maybe from the future. And then he's fucking making a board game. Like this game,
Yeah.
not a pitch that I can actually make because it's 1982 and the cultural history of D&D isn't like universally known enough for it to be a thing. But like, this could have been a Gary Gygax movie.
Hell yeah.
Like, it could have just been like, oh, well, we brought Gary Gygax. He was really into chainmail, but he was trying to figure out how to make a fantasy version of it. Because that's what he's doing. He's like trying to make this board game about dragon stuff, and like had him go on an adventure. And when he comes back, it's like, it's going to be Melf's magic arrow, and it's going to be Mordenkainen's like mystical mansion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes this actual movie, the movie that we got, minus the fact that it's weirdly meta in other ways, exactly what we wanted to pitch for the Dungeons and Dragons 2000 movie that they weren't doing on purpose.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, that's why, because clearly this exact movie has been made already.
Yeah. But they still could have made this movie, and it still would have been better just to remake this movie.
And then yes, the dragon. Well, would it have been better if they had tried to remake it in the Dungeons and Dragons 2000?
I don't know. You know what? No. You know what? No. They would have messed it up somehow.
There's one way that I could see it working, which is that if Marlon Wayans was Peter
Yeah.
and avoid all the racist like stereotype
Honestly,
stuff.
any justice
Yeah.
for his character.
Any justice for snails.
Any
Yeah.
redeemable. Like, it was just, that was rough.
Uh-huh.
That was rough. You know what is also rough? I cringed every time they talked to a woman or about a woman.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
movie.
God.
Oh yeah, when Orin's like, oh, I've known her since she was 5. I was waiting for her to get old enough so I could marry her.
It's so gross. And then immediately, like, when he doesn't have her anymore, he's like, that man here that saved us, it's a woman. He's like instantly in love with her now. It's like, you will be the one I will marry.
Yeah, and they bang.
It is so, oh my God. And then like even the first time that Peter meets, I want to say Marlene, but that's not her name.
Melisande?
Melisande.
Yeah.
The woman he
Like-
built out of his
Yeah, he's like, I
desires.
get out of my memory, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
And I absolutely hated the end where
Mhm.
she shows up because I'm just like,
Mhm.
guys.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
she left the world of magic to go hang out with a dude that she hasn't known. And listen, I grew up, right? Like I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s. I grew up watching Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty was one of my favorite things when I was a kid. But as an adult, I completely understand that if you are sleeping and someone kisses you, it is not okay. And there is not enough between these two people for this kiss to be okay.
No.
Well, they had already kissed, so there at least it's not the first kiss.
I guess. I'm looking at you, Peter. Side-eye.
I don't know if it was the version I was watching, but earlier on in the movie, when he tells her, "Oh, we kissed," I rewinded. And at least in the version I watched, there was no kissing. They were just talking, and then all of a sudden it's the other dragon with a steel chair. So yeah. I don't know where the kiss went in my version, or if you guys saw it in yours. I was like, they never kissed. Why is it saying?
I will be honest. I was like, I'm watching this with, like, I was holding my baby, and like, I was watching this with my wife and my mother-in-law, and like we were chatting, and like I didn't spot the kiss necessarily, and I didn't go back, and I was like, oh, I guess they kissed.
That's fine.
I think that's true too, because I heard them say the kiss line, but I don't remember a kiss. And my ADD, like, there's something about music from animated fantasy films from the 70s and 80s that makes my ADD just wander and trail out. Like, I'm like, I cannot concentrate. Like, the amount of times I rewound, like, I was just like, wait. Someone's missing from the group? Who's missing from the group? How did they leave? Like, oh, no, he's fine. He was just in the background. It's cool.
Actually, I know exactly why I didn't note it, because I was writing down a note, because right before that, we see the evil dragon peering in through the window, and it's like right there.
Yeah.
And then like where they cut away from them hanging out, and it's just Gorbash being like, I swear I smell strange dragon. And he's like literally right there.
Yeah, just standing like right there.
Yeah, it's not like you smell it, like he's like directly in front of you, which I get is just animation convenience. Like, it's not even narrative convenience.
Yeah.
It's just like
he rolled a 1
there. But I was making that note, and that's why I think I wasn't processing that the kiss didn't appear on screen.
That's fine.
But, you cut away, and they're all chatting. Like, they didn't show the kiss. They also don't show Orin, and I'm blanking on
Danielle, I believe.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Much cooler name in the original. A lot more cooler names in the book, but that's fine. That's neither here nor there.
Orin, though, is a cooler name than Brian. I do agree on that.
Yeah, Orin is a cooler name
from a fantasy standpoint. Brian's a great name. I'm not saying fuck you, Brian.
But why does his armor look like that? I think that's most important. Well, I know that, like, in some of the stills, it's the little nodules are drawn higher than where his nipples would be. But they're not always, and it kind of looks like his armor has nipples. He kind of looks like Batman.
Yeah, he gets that vibe, definitely.
Yeah,
mid-90s.
But I mean, like, he is also kind of a dark knight, so that's fine. Actually, he's a very bright knight. He's
a shiny knight, and
aside from his weird desire to bed a 5-year-old when he first meets her. Yeah, I don't.
And he always talks so loud.
He's so loud.
Always loud.
I was so mad at him. Like, I actually had the thought that, like, if he was in my party, I'd be pissed off at him when he was in that tavern, because he was like, "Why are they here? Why are those people?" I'm like, "Shut up, bro!" Like,
to be fair, that is playing a paladin. Like, if you're when you're rolling that character,
the dragons are downstairs. Our precious dragons that we snuck around, because all the other. I was like, "Shut up, bro!"
Yeah, did not put any skill ranks into deception. Like,
nope.
is not proficient in that. Like, he's charming. Like, I think he's very nice when he rolls it. Like, when he first rolls in, it's like, I rode through the night. Do we have time for tea?
I guess that's nice, but like, I'd rather someone who knows how to shut their trap.
Well, yeah. Again, different character classes.
Yeah. He had points in diplomacy.
Right.
I have so many problems with Orin. Go on.
So, before we move too fast from the dragon sneaking up on them with a steel chair situation, it did occur to me that while, yes, it is like kind of hilarious that it's just like outside their window all of a sudden, and then like just all of a sudden right there, the way dragons fly in this make it work fairly well.
Yeah.
Because they're basically blimps, and the wings are just to like direct them.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, you know what? They would probably smell, and we know that there's a smell. But, yeah, they probably don't make a lot of noise when they fly, because they're kind of just like floating around like a balloon.
Little balloon boys.
Yeah, adorable, fire-breathing little balloon boys.
Yeah, they do have to let out a lot of flame when they land, but he could have done that further away. So
he could have been shooting it straight up or something like that. And we don't know how much actual noise is made by the fire, because it's never really indicated to be that loud. It's just the fire itself. we have to talk about just the fucking science of the dragon stuff. I fucking love it
Absolutely.
so goddamn much.
Yeah.
Like, I love the designs of the dragon. I love that they're fat.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's so cool. I love that they describe their stomachs as like this multi-chambered, like honeycomb of like filling up with gases. Like, the science is not quite right. Limestone doesn't actually turn into hydrogen when it's dissolved.
No, but calcium does. So I looked
yes,
into
exactly.
this. I was like, there's enough of a link sciencey for this. I'll approve.
Right. It's close. It's not. They just list the wrong thing, but it's fine. I love the goddamn, like, we have to exhale hydrogen to like go up and down, and I love the thimble that is the shocking part that ignites the hydrogen. I think that's so cool.
Oh yeah.
And also, I think it works really well in terms of all the things that they put in there to set up why dragons are scary, even if they're not trying to be. Because for them to land, they have to be exhausting flames everywhere, which means that that's why you get this like idea of dragons being this terrifying thing of just like fire everywhere they go. But they can't help it because that's just how they move. Like, it's a destructive aspect of their nature. And then we get into the dragon horde stuff. And I fucking love that it's like, oh, they have beds of gold because that's the only thing that's soft enough for them to sleep on that they don't put on fire.
Yeah. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. All right, cool.
I think I also especially love the conversation, especially when they're drawing out the diagram because Peter is now inside of Gorbash and has to figure everything out. I especially like it because it kind of links science and magic together, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, but that's actually this. And so, like, the whole like thesis in the beginning that like, no, people still need magic, even if they're walking away from it to inspire them, gets kind of pulled through. Like, it's part of the through line. So I thought that was actually really nice. So, like, that's another thing that comes from that diagram where it's like, oh, yeah, that's how they relate.
Yeah, I got that feeling where, like, one of the big takeaways for me from the film was that there's two different ways that magic can bleed into our world. And there's the way that they do it through inspiration, and then there's Almadon's way of doing it through seeding fear and greed and things. So I like the way those two kind of played off of each other in the film.
Yeah, and it was interesting that like all of their magic is kind of mental to a certain degree. Like, while dragons are like very clearly like a being that would be associated with magic, like the way that the wizards all behave, like even Almadon with his most direct attacks are usually some kind of illusion or fear-based thing. And the others are all like inspire people to function. Like, sure, they can get a person back up again who's like died, but like there's very few points. And I also, one of the through lines is that their magic is weaker than it would be otherwise, even Almadon. So like, sure, maybe they don't have access to like, you know, fireball or anything like that, but like they clearly have lots of enchantments and illusion spells and maybe some abjuration in there. Most of their magic is not like pure energy function stuff without it having like logical reasons for it to work. Like, there's a lot of science behind the scenes for any of the things that we see.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's an early 80s, like, fantasy story. So, like, one, it's tropey as hell. Like, we haven't talked about any of, like, the encounters, because the encounters are all just like, oh, they fought an ogre. It's the same fucking thing that you would put. It's a random encounter that you would do anyway.
Pretty much.
They had, like, monsters that tried to drive them insane, and a zombie wolf saved them. Side note, great way to have a druid in your party without having it be, like, too OP. So that was fun right there. All the encounters are like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that part makes sense. And we get some tangent flashbacks, which are like backstory stuff, which is all like, oh, okay, cool. We had that night fight with a dragon. All right, well, that's a one-on-one that we got to see because it's separate. Oh, they were attacked by thieves while they were wandering through the forest. Okay, cool. Like, there's nothing for us to really talk about there because it's all like, yeah, no, these are normal fantasy tropes right there.
Yeah, just like recapping previous sessions. Like, oh.
Yes. Which also, I thought while I was watching it, I was like, oh, Melisandre's recounting of things felt very much like the role for recap at the start of every session, which also I just kind of enjoyed.
Just the notes, Melisandre, yes. They're going they're getting
Wonderful
to the
notes.
Oh, yeah.
Last time we were here.
And then this detail, I can't quite see it clearly, / I didn't take a note, or I was using the bathroom at this point. When I came back,
I believe that's
something
when
had happened and we'd moved on.
That's when the Grubhub arrived.
Okay, Zombie's wolf name is like Arg, right? Arg.
It's like Arag, yeah.
Arag. Yeah, Arag. What a terrible name. For such a wonderful character.
Yeah.
Very mad about that.
Yeah. Same like the evil dragon, which is also very close to that. I think it's like
That's Smurgle or Briag.
Briag.
Briag, yeah.
And then
Briag,
Smurgle.
yeah.
I like Smurgle.
Poor Smurgle.
All the dragon names are hard to say in ways that don't sound like you're just making guttural noises.
Which I guess makes sense since there are dragons, I guess.
Yeah, that part. Logical. I like the vocal fry effect that they put on Arag.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this was intentional for specifically the hydrogen part, but it made me think that they were like exhaling weird gases while they were talking.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of cool.
That's a nice way to think about it. Yeah, they definitely had like this weird fry sound to all the dragons, which was pretty neat.
Yeah. I mean, like, just in general, like, they were very consistent with, like, oh, you're letting out too much fire. You're, like, all of that I thought was really cool. And then the other monsters had similar kind of things going for it. Like, when they get to the ogre, it's like, oh, well, it's actually, like, even though it doesn't look like it in the drawing, they talk about how it's bony on the outside. So it's like, oh, it's an exoskeleton. Like, okay, cool. Like, these are reasons why it works this way.
It's like bones all the way down.
Yeah, this movie actually does a really good job in terms of, like, the encounters. Like, because you have Peter as your surrogate introduction to the world, does a really good job at setting up like how difficult the encounter is going to be like ahead of time. Because Smeagol would just be like, they're actually, you can't bite them because it's all bone and you can't do this and you can't do that. So it's like already setting the parameters of what the fight is going to be, you know, which I think is like really good because you kind of get that exposition without the same way that your DM, your dungeon master, would kind of give you like the lowdown on the character, but you're getting it like on the way to the battle to go save your idiot paladin who wouldn't shut the heck up and deserved to be kidnapped. And so you go and you tell him on the way. I mean, did Smeagol deserve to die for Orin? No, not at all. Much far superior character. Person, even if there's a dragon. I don't care. Do not defend the paladin.
No, I'm just gonna say he also died too. So.
Fair enough.
Let's be clear here. Everyone fucking dies in this movie.
But I don't know if Smeagol gets revived.
I don't think he comes back.
He wasn't close enough. He was out of the area of effect of the spell.
Right. No, that part kind of sucks.
He's just like, the ogre. Like, I guess we're dead. Yeah, I guess we're dead. Okay.
Yeah, like they don't get to live in the land of magic in perpetuity. Like even though like yes, it's like the gray heavens, right? Like all magic is gone and blah blah blah. It doesn't matter. Like Orin got to be there. He shouldn't have. A real feeling.
He's just gonna go after more 5-year-olds. I'm concerned. Oh man.
I mean, at least it comes off as this whole like he has a code kind of thing, and like that he doesn't really have like emotions.
Them, it's like a groomer.
Well, no, I mean like he has like a code of like I guess what I'm trying to say is like he doesn't actually seem that he has like honest feelings so much as it's just like, well, I'm supposed to, you know, court the princess kind of thing. I don't know if this.
My wife was she kind of made it a bit more like sad to say, but like Jacob is in Twilight. Their situation when he imprints.
Yeah, like imprinted.
Like the type of love changes. Where at first it's like a paternal, brotherly, and then it changes like it's kind of built in. So maybe that's the vibe Orin's going for, where it's going to protect this. I just can't wrap my head around protecting this child that I will one day marry.
I had a problem with it in Twilight. So.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, no, like, let's be clear, not good, but also I don't know if it's necessarily like inaccurate to like the pseudo medieval setting. I don't even say pseudo because like it's supposed to be like ancient England. It's just like back when magic used to be real, before magic was pulled away from our world, like and all the things that seem weird. Yeah. Well, that all went to this other magical place. And by the way, we should all be speaking French, but who cares?
Yeah. No more magic. Now we have cryptocurrency.
Right. Because like some of the chivalric elements, like they're like that's certainly similar to stuff like in A Knight's Tale, for example, like Chaucer, not the Heath Ledger movie.
Yeah.
So there are elements that are like that, and like I think some of it comes down to trying to codify in a societally positive, I don't know if it's actually positive for people, but trying to codify some of the like the weird toxic masculinity components, because like, hey, buzzwords for people playing the bingo at home, because there is this element of like, well, he is not the entrusted protector of her from the standpoint of being her like foster father or surrogate father, the way Cornelius is, like, but he still loves her, and it's like because he is not able to like wrap his head around how that love is supposed to be not any, like, because it seems purely platonic the entire time. Like at no point is he really like invested in her emotionally. He never like hits on her or anything. Like he has no amorous like displays towards her.
No.
But his only way of rationalizing what that is supposed to be under the code he lives by is that he's supposed to defend a maiden and like take her as his like bride.
Yeah, the closest we get is when he goes to Peter. He's like, I should punch you because that's my girlfriend.
Right, but I think he's actually kind of funny about it, and also clearly like doesn't actually have emotions connected to that all. So like I'm not trying to defend it, but I'm saying that he is participating in a system as opposed to being the person who is creating that system.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this, I've been knocking him a lot and his little nipple hinges. But I will say that like the whole idea is that like this is a fairy tale, fairy book land. And so the things that would happen there, like this is the land of magic, this is the land of stories that we've been told many, many times. And so he's like a character in those stories trapped by the cycle of those stories, kind of. So you can say that. It's still weird.
Yep.
Yeah.
But most fairy tales are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Again, there's not really much to really talk about in terms of the actual plot because it's just like magic encounters kind of stuff. One thing I found fascinating is that it's specifically 1,000 years in the past. Like they note that, it's 10 centuries. And it's like, so that actually lines up pretty closely with like 1066 and like the Norman invasion and changing the nature of how England perceived the world. And actually the introduction of a lot of those chivalric tendencies coming from France by way of the Normans and changing the language as much as it does, like the shift from Old English to Modern English, all of those elements are there. And like, it's kind of interesting because like there is like sort of this degree of the fantasy world that predated more like mainland European concepts being like introduced. Like Lancelot, for example, is part of like the Arthurian legend. He's introduced by way of the Norman conquest. So like elements like that coming over and reshaping like the perception of the fantasy world that was perceived by the people of the time. Like the mythology of England is then completely reshaped as like French and Norman by way of being like a French settled but Norwegian, like being Viking people. Like all of that is manipulated and shifted and so forth. And I don't know how much is actually thought about. I think like 10,000 years is also just a fun number.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that it happens to line up like where there is a giant cultural shift in England.
Yeah. And that is pretty neat that it lined up that way. The other big number that they point out, the 777 generations, doesn't really line up to anything because that means that Peter is derived from existed about 21,000 years ago, which would just kind of be pre all of this stuff.
Well, that also like that Peter, the one who trained them, is also like way earlier relative to their time. So that's also kind of a thing. And like, you know, you could have had a lot of like Teen Mom episodes in the interim there on their little glow crystals. Really popular show. And also the Child Brides, like all the 5-year-olds.
Yeah, there you go.
Taken by the night. Yeah. Icky, but there.
Horrible.
Yeah.
I will say that I think that for a half a second, like when Peter was denouncing magic, because he had to do so in order to defeat the evil villain, there was a part of me that was like, no, but you've seen magic everywhere. I understand the thesis and I get it, and like magic has to go somewhere else, but I was just kind of like, man, I'm not sure if I like this movie. I'm not sure if I like the message of like, you have to grow up and it's got to stay, you know, in order for magic to be safe, it's got to be hidden. And it's just food for thought. This is not really like a real criticism. That's just personal feelings about like how I wish that the world was, you know, a little more magical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Peter. How dare you?
I think the thesis is muddled at the end. And also on that note, the ending of the movie is different than the ending of the book. Like in the book, George stays in this timeline and has more adventures and like brings, you know, 20th century know-how to this like fantasy England setting. I think that the idea is that what the actual thesis of like the book, The Flight of Dragons is, which is like we have these fantastical elements, but you could make it more interesting by way of introducing science, and like you don't have to necessarily believe to still find fantasy in it all and to still appreciate it. Like he's going to write that book. Like he's still going to go on and do that. He's going to like he makes this board game. I think the argument is that adults can appreciate fantasy too, even if they understand that it's not real. That doesn't make it not true. I think is the idea that they're trying to get to, but I agree. It's muddled and it feels
it gets really muddled. And then it's super weird because, like, he denounces magic, right? Like, so he denounces magic. He's like, whatever. He leaves automatically because he can never come back to the world of magic. And right before he's joined by his lady love, who leaves behind her life of magic, he pulls out a giant shield.
Right.
that clearly he got from the world of magic that he said wasn't real.
Mhm.
Wait, what? Feels like you can't have both, movie. You cannot have both. Either magic is real and he left empty-handed because he defeated magic, or he had a hoard and he stole that from the dragon's hoard. Like, you know what? Now I'm even more like that just occurred to me. Like that belongs to our beloved.
Actually, it
brave
doesn't.
little
That's the shield
dragon.
that was given to him
It
directly.
belongs in a museum.
It belongs
But yeah,
in a museum.
But yeah, why is he just going to a pawn shop with that shit?
Because he wants the money. He's going to travel to all the different places and maybe even take some cruises.
Yeah.
Well, and have a nice little
Oh,
cottage
no.
with his lady love. That shield at least was the shield that he was given as
Yeah.
part of his quest, so that at least he's not stealing from the dragon. Because that would be a bad choice. Like, why? Why would you do that?
Oh, that's right. It was from the quest.
I enjoyed. There's like a couple like throwaway lines like the enjoy some cruises in there that just really got a big laugh out of me. Another one was like he talks about like, oh man, this is a really good movie show, or something along those lines. Or just like the writing could have been better.
Yeah,
in a lot of
Some
places.
spots where it could be tighter.
There are these like fun little like throwaway lines from like certain characters that are kind of like. I actually love that they sing "Oh Madeline, would you cry for me" when they get drunk because he's like, "Sing me a song of your people."
Yes.
I think that it's like so funny because I'm just like, this movie is ridiculous. It's great. I was like, but they couldn't figure out a song that was like more from Boston, which I think.
I guess not. No,
it's even funnier.
That's a song about
Like-
going from Alabama to Louisiana.
Oh God, you could make such a funny modern version of this with like just like going ham on the Boston stuff, where it's like you cut back to them in the basement. It's like ship it off to Boston.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or like if it's early, like later on, to just have them like now because we're making it now. Have them sing "Sweet Caroline."
Yeah,
This is what they do at the Red Sox Stadium.
that is a very Bostonian song now.
Yeah.
And that would fit like both in when they're drinking and when they're screaming and trying to deal with the psychic damage that they were being dealt with by singing the song.
Yeah.
You could also like tie in something where like the easiest way for him to like get the breath part is by like singing songs, and so he starts doing just like like drinking songs.
Yeah.
Now there were other notes with like Carolinas has several points where he makes references to future technology, or like he at one I forget the full thing, he like says like seersucker, whatever the outfit he's wearing, and it's like
covered with dragon smoke, and I was like, sir, how do you know?
Like, yeah, what do you know? How do you know about
yeah.
He's a seersucker department store.
Yes, that's it. The department store.
In,
like how,
department store covered in dragon smoke. That's not good.
Right, both parts of that. Like my wife and I were like, how does he know what seersucker is? How does he know what a department store is?
They're far more omnipotent and omniscient than they like to let off.
Yeah, which would make sense if it was like Merlin doing like the life backwards kind of thing.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Like, we don't get any kind of vibe like that, so I don't know.
No,
right? It's kind of weird because he pulls him back with the acorn. He doesn't travel through time, so it like that threw me off too. Like so much so that I remembered the exact line to say it to you today.
Yeah. That said, I think that the convention of having him, Peter, that is, merged with the dragon, I think is one of the reasons why this was memorable. Even though I actually forgot that part, but I fucking loved it as a kid because it's so cool to be like, oh yeah, you could have your brain put inside of a dragon.
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome.
Right? Because like who doesn't want to be a dragon, right? So now you get that self-insert where you're like, oh, we can be the dragon. How cool is this?
Yeah, it's a self-insert for all of us because like anyone who's like into this kind of thing wants to be that kind of fairly academic. If you're into fantasy, you probably at least think you're smart and wanting to believe that you could be that kind of character in a fantasy world, bringing 20th century knowledge to do like that's the exact kind of fantasy that like we all had as kids, where it's like, oh, well, like how cool would it be from this modern era to go to fucking Narnia and like bring all the cool stuff that we know about and be even better at being a fantasy person than the fantasy people. And we got to be a dragon in this. Like, how cool is that?
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's also just like gives you a chance, like if you ever imagined what it's like he's explaining it to you, right? Like even if you're not the kind of person that would have broken down the science to it, he's telling you what it's like to be a dragon. He's like, oh my God, this is how I feel. Like, it's like, he might as well be singing I'm Pretty. Like, he might as well be just like telling you how amazing it is. Watching him fly, I was like, oh my God, he's doing it. Like, I think that that's the fun of this film.
Yeah, there's maximum whimsy.
Yeah. But, and then this is sort of like one of my actual concerns about this movie, which is that the tone all over the place in terms of like, who is this actually for? And I get it. This is 1980s, early 1980s animated fantasy stuff. Like, look, the fucking pilot from My Little Pony is scary as shit. They have a demon centaur man abducting unicorns and magically torturing them and turning them into dragon horses. And that's My Little Pony. Like, Care Bears had like literally Satan.
Yeah.
like there's weird shit in the fantasy that they were expecting the youngest of the young to watch, let alone the medium of the young or like the slightly older. So like, I get not necessarily knowing what the tone is.
I think we run into this every time we watch something from the 80s or even the early 90s. We run into this moment of like, shit, this is kind of for kids, but this kind of shouldn't be for kids. And I think this is like a running theme of that time. It's just like, there's just this expectation that like, I don't know if it's maybe because there's just like less media. I don't know if it's just that like Sesame Street has just kicked off and like it's really the only thing really geared to kids to educate kids. But at this point, like people are still making media that's kind of like made by adults, not really thinking about what kids like. It's just like, well, it's colorful, so they'll get over it. Gotta face your trauma sometime, kids. I mean, technically, jungle gyms were made out of metal and they were in the sun. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
These were all made by the people who kind of grew up with the birth of animated film. Like there really wasn't a whole lot. It was like what started like the 40s and the 50s, but really started to kick into gear around then. So they grew up and they're like, well, I want to do something more that I want to see, and then they're grown now. So they're going to make that. And just that time frame, there was just a lot of really weird quasi psychedelic stuff. They hadn't really merged the two well yet. Where like, children's animated and more adult animated stuff.
Yeah.
The other argument is this for adults or or at least like older kids? And like, I think there are a few elements where it's like, well, it's hard to really say it feels a little kiddie, but maybe the subtlety of combining adult humor with more youthful oriented stuff, it may just not have been refined enough at that point. Cause like you could look to a Shrek or like some, some more modern kind of examples where it's like, oh, they can really like sneak that kind of humor in, but also it's really like there for kids. And there's certainly stuff like that. Again, like Orin and Danielle, like walk off holding hands because like tomorrow they're going to die kind of moment. You know what's going on there. Okay. Or the drinking stuff, all that. It's like, oh, this is mead versus wine. Like having an actual debate about that is so great. And kids aren't going to care.
No.
But there are spots where it's like, oh, well, this is very kiddie. Particularly the opening sequence, which I would like for us to talk about next. But
definitely.
Is this for like older kids? Ultimately, yes. But I think that it undercuts it at a few points by being a little too whimsical.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, people are just going to always make, especially back then, right? Like there's like not that many. I feel like now we're so spoiled with having so many different options. Like you can like go and seek out a channel that's just like is going to have like 10 different programs. It's just for your kid at their age level and they can grow and that kind of thing. Where like during this time, you have to make things that are kind of more like general all family. So like if you've got like a 10-year-old in the room and a 4-year-old in the room, you got to make a movie that can kind of appeal to both. And so you're going to put some whimsy, you're going to put some fairies in it. You're going to like have magic and have a duck kind of get hurt and then revived by a friendly wizard. And 80s, we really start talking about environmental stuff. So you're going to talk about the evil of machines, and cleaning things up for the kids. But then for the 10-year-old, you're going to talk about the science. You're going to talk about helium and stuff like that. And then for the parents, you're going to have two people go off, because it's might be their last night on the earth.
Right.
And I think, does it feel like you're being mind fucked when you're watching it now? Yes. When I was watching this, I was like, okay, brain, try to pay attention. Wait, what? Why? Yes. Okay, fun part. Okay, now I'm bored again. Like, like it's just one of those things where the pacing feels really off. But I think it's partially because making movies at that time, you're trying to put a little bit of everything for everyone in there,
Yeah.
especially if you're doing an animated film, because that you're going to try to market it to as broad a field as you possibly can, because animation is expensive and
Mhm.
because you got to. There's only so many channels. There's only so many avenues. You just got to try to get whoever you can. It's a great family movie for the whole family. Flight of the Dragons.
Well, and it was a TV movie. Like that's the other part where like there's certainly standards that they're like trying to compete with, and like they may not have been sure like what could fly and what wouldn't.
That's probably why they only had the second kiss. Probably couldn't have two kisses.
No, yeah. And it was one tier below made for TV. It was straight to video movie.
Well, but then it's commercial breaks.
I know, it was weird. Like it was like the bottom rung of all of it, so it got the least amount of funding. And I know it was being made at the same time as The Last Unicorn, and I feel like a lot of Rankin Bass's resources went to that instead.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And that's annoying that it's got the commercial. I mean, I guess they made it direct to video, but also were like, oh, it can also air in syndication, so they put the breaks in there. But
it might have been the other way around, where like the medium tier was direct to video and this was only for TV. That would make more sense with it. But I know it was like the bottom of the bottom. So like they had the smallest budget possible, and they didn't have a whole lot of resources to go to.
I mean, that makes sense. And I think the limitations of animation at that time and the budget that they had are both big factors for why it kind of comes off a little bit more whimsical. Like there's certainly spots where the goofiest moments are plenty of times where it's just like, oh, they just didn't have the budget to have like a third insert for that shot right there. Badass scene, but like when Orin is like talking up his sword before he dies, like straight up, it's a static shot of his helmet. His eyes don't blink. It is just there. His helmet is covering his face so he can talk for like a solid 30 seconds, but there's literally no motion on screen.
Yep. But it was a good speech, so it was okay.
It's a great fucking speech. Yeah. I am stealing that speech the next time I'm playing a paladin. It's a great speech, but it does not
my gosh.
have a single frame of animation. I do think that contributes to some of the sort of whimsical elements of it all. And then I think also the movie kind of stumbles into its fantasy setting in a way that isn't good. And this is a little bit of a spoiler for my pitch, but like the fact that we start in the fantasy world and then bring the viewpoint character in, I think is a little bit frustrating from the standpoint of actually getting this world set up, because we open with like some of the more ridiculous kind of things going on, namely the very heavy-handed metaphor of logic versus magic when the fairies land on the swan and it gets like sucked under the water wheel.
I have so many thoughts about that water wheel part.
I mean, the scene exists to be like, here's why the wizard wants to summon everyone and like have this conversation. But like, it's so on the nose. It's on the very large nose of Carolinas. And we get the weird, like, they're not humans, but I think they're supposed to be kind of like semi-fantasy humans.
Like halflings or something. They don't tell you what they are, but they're not dwarves, because we do get to see dwarves and they're just little round balls of fluff. So yeah, there's some other fantasy being. You don't really get to know what they are exactly. But they have very distinct accents.
But yeah, that whole sequence, like, it's so on the nose. It's such an abrupt start to this whole like plot of it all that honestly, if you cut that scene, I think like the movie works so much better.
Shush, you're getting spoilers away from my scene. Anyway,
I mean, but like, what are you gonna do? How can you get rid of that middle guy that sounds like he's from South Jersey telling the wizard to fuck off? You know, like that's gold. That's comedy gold. You know?
Honestly, what we need to establish is that this entire time, the whole thing was fucking set in Boston, and it's just ancient Boston versus modern Boston.
It's just a fever dream.
Go Sox.
Go Sox. Oh man, there's one thing this movie did, and this is probably more of a me thing, but when they're so on the nose at the beginning about how logic this, and I was like, all right, so they're gonna have some science in this, they're gonna be accurate, right? That's what I hope. And then they immediately show the water wheel somehow creating suction, pulling that duck or goose, and I was like, that's not how water wheels work. When I hear that sort of stuff, it turns that part of my brain on, so now I'm being severely like nitpicky. Another throwaway line later where they said the way the dragon flies is just how a 747 works, and I'm just like, it's nothing how a 747 works.
I understood what he was trying to say there, though. It's not that the 747 operates as a lighter than aircraft, but my understanding was that the specific wind flow component there with the way the wings were functioning, but I thought that was just me trying to justify it, because I also thought, like, well, it's more of a dirigible, but I'm guessing what they mean is by the way the wings are working.
I would have said this is how the Goodyear blimp works or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's just me. Like, that's a severe me thingy. And I was like, well, if you're trying to make a movie that's accurate with the science, you got to be accurate all the time, at least for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when they said that line, though, it was a callback to Carolina saying that, humans would have airplanes and things like that in the future. So I think it was like one of those things where it's like, oh, it's a callback to him like prophesizing. But you are correct. And that is annoying. So.
I apologize if pointing that out made you notice it, and now you're noticing it and it's bothering you.
No, it's okay. I kind of like, I actually did what Case did, and I was kind of like, oh, maybe he means like how he's using his wings to steer, like how he's using it against the wind currents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I did exactly what Case did. Was I was like, okay, maybe it's wing stuff.
I have a really hard
justify.
Yeah, I have a very hard time sometimes suspending my disbelief. I was trying. I did for the most part.
It's fine. It happens.
Now I'm thinking, like, you know what the other thing this movie could have really used, which is just like a pure Led Zeppelin soundtrack, because all the dragons are just Zeppelins.
That's true.
Yeah. Hey, listen. My least favorite thing about this movie is the soundtrack. And that's only because fantasy movies, and I get it, there's not a lot of money here. This is like made for TV. This is not even going to be part of my pitch. But I have to say that like animated fantasy films from like the late 70s, early 80s, including, and I'm going to include the Rudolph universe in this, not just Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but the whole universe with Heatmeister and all of that stuff. They all had this like background music that like, I don't know, it just always like turns my brain off. Like my ADD is just like, I can't focus on this. Like, I don't know what this elevator-esque music is to me. And so like it just like it always, I don't know, it almost has like a particular smell, like an old-fashioned like old leather smell to me. And I don't know if that's like because I was watching these movies like in a grandparent or grandparent friend's kind of house, but like whenever I go to watch it, even now as an adult several years later, and I turn them on, I automatically start getting sleepy and my brain just starts going elsewhere. So yeah, I'm sorry if anyone hears this and you wrote the music for it.
No.
It's probably
no.
It's just my brain.
No,
I'm sorry.
it's the classic like Rankin and Bass style music. He made all of those Rudolph films and all that stuff. That's why you're probably getting that from this.
Yeah. Well, and also Sam's apparent undiagnosed synesthesia, like
right.
Yeah.
Maybe. Oh gosh,
Sam,
it's awakened a sixth sense.
Have you ever watched the Rankin and Bass Return of the King?
I have. Yes, I have.
I love The Hobbit, and the thing that I disliked about that movie, but could get over it because it's not that bad in The Hobbit, is the music. But then you get to the Return of the King, and that one where they're like, you know what people loved about The Hobbit? The music. Let's double down on the music. Frodo of the Nine Fingers. So I was thinking about that, where it's like, well, at least this isn't as bad as The Return of the King.
Yeah, at the moment, I have the Greatest Adventure song from The Hobbit stuck in my head. So I'm just hearing that while we're doing this right now over and over again.
And listen, I said this before we started recording. I love the theme song of this movie. The theme song was really good. It was a good theme song. And I felt like it made a promise of music and adventure to come. And it did not deliver.
Oh, yeah.
They could have at least used the theme song once again. Like, it would have been nice, and this is actually part of my pitch, it would have been nice to use the theme song at the very end when all of the dragons come out, because it would have been, like, kind of a cool tie-in to the beginning. Even without the words, just the instrumental, I think it would have been really nice, and I think it would have been really cool. Yeah. And it would have offered a little bit of difference to a score that is essentially fantasy bland.
Yeah. My wife kept on getting frustrated that it sounded very like Mozart-esque throughout. Like there was like this Baroque quality to the music, which wasn't like it feels old-timey to us now, but it doesn't actually feel fantasy, which was like on top of all of that. So like, yes, it's bland and old-timey bland, but like it's a little too harpsichordy as opposed to like lyre.
Okay. Yeah.
Just
more strings, less piano.
Right.
Some flutes. Definitely. Or
I agree that the soundtrack is not really a seller on this. Although, again, all these Rankin Bass movies have at least like one bop.
Yeah.
So like there's the opening theme, great. You know, like, look, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Every fucking song in that movie is terrible,
Yeah.
aside from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
That's the call sign. The opening song is usually really good, and it lulls you into a false sense of security. And he has to deal with all the rest of it.
Mr. Heatmeister.
Yes.
He's Mr. Cold. That's great. That's a great song. Oh.
Yes, exactly. It had one bop per movie. And so we got that bop at the very beginning of this movie, and it never comes back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. They just reprise it. They should have just reprised it.
Yeah. So again, like, I think that I'm feeling pretty good about this movie, but I am super aware that I have like hardcore nostalgia glasses going on when I'm looking at this movie. Every time we got to a new section, I was like, oh, fuck, right. I remember that. And I got really excited. And so that's coming into it like with a fairly warm, but it was like, and I knew that I was going to have warm about like the actual Flight of Dragons part and all that. Like I knew that was all going to be there for me. Sam, before we go to break, I am curious, like, what is your overall takeaway of this movie?
I feel like it's an okay movie. Like it's not my favorite. And I think that there's some really like lovely things in it. I think there's some good characters. But I do think that there's some characters I hate and there's some weird stuff going on. And so like if someone was just like, "Hey, do you recommend this movie?" I'd be like, "How much do you like the science of dragons?" And if they were like, "I'm really into it," I'd be like, "Yeah, fucking watch it." But if they were like, "Yeah, not really," I'd be like, "Nah, that's okay. There are other fantasy things to watch that have dragons in it. Go and watch those because this is a time capsule of an era of fantasy. And like, honestly, you've probably played better D&D campaigns if you play D&D with better names. Those gosh darn names. Oh, so yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. I didn't hate the experience of watching it. There were moments where I was like, is this an assault on my brain? And then there were moments where like, I really like this. So yeah, I would be like, 5 out of 10. Watch if you love dragons.
All right. Joe, before we go to break, I know that you were excited for this and then that you said it didn't hold up that well in the email. What's your like general kind of sense of this movie before we start speculating on it?
For me personally, I feel like there are like the bones of a good movie here. It's just wrapped with a whole lot of other weird stuff on top that didn't really hit properly for me. The way the tone and the way the pacing kind of just goes from slow to super fast and throws you all over the place. It's very jarring. But there's a lot of really good stuff here that could really be made into something spectacular. It's just not there for me personally.
Yeah.
Now, when you rewatched it, did you watch it with your son?
I did not because I couldn't get him to sit still long enough, really. But he has watched the old Hobbit with me. We've watched the old Lord of the Rings, too. He isn't really super huge on fantasy, but he has watched every single Godzilla film about 5 times from 1955 up to the newest. So that's really where he lies more in like anime and kaiju, big battle, and sci-fi and things like that.
Okay.
So that's just not really his jam. He would have sat there for 5 seconds and be like, why did they the first scene, why did they hurt the duck? I'm out. And he would leave. Because one thing about my son is he's like lawful good, the alignment personified. If a main character does something in a movie that isn't good, he will stop watching the movie. That person wasn't nice. So I can't watch this now. Bye. And he'll walk off. He has like some real strong moral code in that for some reason.
Well,
I respect
both commendable, and I can relate, frankly.
Yeah. I was like, no, it's a redemption arc. Don't worry. He's like, no, I can't do it.
I don't receive that redemption.
Mentioning kaiju movies, I do want to give a shout out real quickly to another podcast that we're friends with, Castle Bravo. Derek and Charlotte were recently-ish on talking about the 1970s King Kong movie, but their entire show is talking about the history of Godzilla-verse movies going in chronological order.
Love
and
it.
it's a really interesting breakdown. They just wrapped up season 2, so shouting that one out because like it's very cool to like listen to all the themes that go into it behind the scenes that like the kids don't notice because it's like, ooh, that's a giant moth and that's fun. But where it's like also talking about like Japanese colonialism.
Yes. There's so much more subtext than people realize. They're just like, ooh, big monster in suit. Like, but it's so much more than that. Just give it a shot,
Yeah. That really highlights just how much you can put in there for people who want to like explore the text and think about it and still have like something that is just like fun for kids, which, I think this movie wanted to be and didn't get there. So why don't we take a break and we will give a shout out to a show that's actually on our network as opposed to just friends of ours who have a podcast. When we come back, we will discuss what we would have done differently in 1982 when creating The Flight of the Dragons as an animated movie adapting a book that is of that name and also a different series of books that is a totally different thing. Let's see what we come up with.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
Writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not.
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans.
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
She will be mine. Aurora.
And we're back. All right. So we have laid out some of the interesting elements of what this movie was. I will say, full disclosure, in all of the research I tried to do on it, I could not find why the fuck they combined these two properties, like, at all. So we could speculate on some of that, but I have no way of saying, like, oh, well, they did this for this reason or that. Like, in terms of, like, us trying to come up with, like, what was realistic in terms of the adaptation at the time, no fucking clue whatsoever. We know what the two source materials were. We know the people who made it, and we know the time it came out, but zero idea why it was decided to do an adaptation of one book series, but call it a different book and have like elements and then name the main character after the author of the other book for no fucking idea. That puts a wrinkle in our usual conversation of like what could have realistically been done at the time of production to make it a better movie. But I do think that we can come up with some ideas. So, Joe, we have one standing rule in terms of like the actual order of who goes, which is that I am not allowed to go before Sam. As our guest, you may select to go first. You may select Sam to go first. And if Sam goes first, I can follow and you can back cleanup or you can go second, whatever.
I think I'm fine with Sam going first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh no, because I feel like my pitch for this is not great. But
Oh, just you wait.
so my big thing was I wasn't going to change too much of the structure of this film. I think that the structure itself is okay. Like, I don't think like it's amazing. I also think it's a very short runtime, which I think is merciful. Like, it's not super long. I think that's great for kids and also for TV. So I thought that was fine. I don't like specifically the water wheel in the first half. So I want that to be more mechanical, like whatever machine that has to be there, whether it's like a dyeing machine, you know, like you see, like when you're making like clothing and cloth, like sometimes some of those dyes can actually be really harmful to water or something. Basically, I wanted our 3 possibly humanoid creatures that were disrespectful and messy to have a more industrial looking machine that was polluting the water. There are natural books where like water wheels work and they don't pollute the water. Like,
Yeah,
like
they
when I
don't.
was watching it,
They don't
like when I was
pollute.
watching it, I was like, what, where did the sludge come from all of a sudden? Like, I don't understand. So I think that it would be better to like focus on fairies being sick by the water and him finding sick fairies and then like following it to this more industrial thing that is like leaking water into it and make it so that it's like a bigger like factory kind of thing, you know, inside of the world of magic that is just making stuff. It could even be making like magic things wastefully, like wands, like, and like all the other wood gets thrown. But I just think that it needs to be like more mechanical, more of an outside thing that should not be in a space that is a space of magic, more like a steampunk kind of feel to it. Just because I wanted to feel more of the modern world, the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, like the pollution aspect isn't really there.
Right.
Hydroelectric power is very good. And
Yeah.
like that it doesn't make sense there. And then like the biggest environmental disaster that happens is actually that worm they encounter later with like the toxic
Yeah.
sludge.
Yeah.
So like why does it happen the way it does?
Yeah. There's no reason why the water would be brown on the other end of that, right? And also, that whale was not the entire lake from the first point of animation, and the duck was just dumb. Like,
Poor duck.
I just think that like it would have been better to have almost like a factory setting, making something you can tie it to the Dark Wizard too. Like it can be something that he's pumping out to the main world. I don't know. Or it needs to be that the veil between the land of magic and the land of people, and it has to be closer to the Industrial Revolution. So you'd have to change the dates, right? Is bleeding into the world of magic. And that's why we need to close it off. We need to close off the world of magic because man's step forward is basically polluting our world too. Like they're polluting their own world, but that is coming into here and it's killing our land and our fairies and things like that. And so it has to be like a decided factor that like we are going to cut ourselves off from the realm of men to protect magic and to protect magical creatures. Then there's like a more of a reason for the council meeting to happen because it's like this real thing. And then of course, like our lovely hard-headed brother in red, he doesn't have to be fully evil yet, can just be like, no, we do a lot of things for people. We do a lot of things. We inspire them. No, we shouldn't cut them off. In fact, what we should just do is like turn them around, destroy the machines, take it over, we'll blah, blah, blah. And so like that kind of starts it, and we can still go the same route, but we just change it just slightly. And then I like all of the discovery stuff. I am going to nix any conversation about a woman when she is 3 feet from someone about them when it sounds like you are going to be like, oh, she is my dream. I created her. No, shut up. Just say she's really pretty, okay? Do not be creepy, all right? You did not dream her up. Do not be creepy. So all of that needs to go, including when Orin sees, I cannot remember her name, but our lovely ranger, when he sees her in the woods and is like, hubba, hubba. He doesn't say that, but that's basically his reaction. Okay, that's definitely going to change to
You
just
definitely hear a little like
appreciation.
ding sound inside of his armor.
Oh, no.
Listen, he gets the big eyes, the old, like they
Auga.
stop short of having his like tongue roll out and the sign pop up in front of his head. All of that's being cut from my version of this. Like they can still hold hands and go to bed. It's fine, whatever. Definitely keeping the drinking scene for the dragons, all the sciencey stuff. Although, yes, let's fix it. Let's talk about blimps and dirigibles because why not? Let's just fix it. Let's make sure if we're gonna teach children about science in the movie and how science is magic, let's just make sure that like we're giving them the right information because they're gonna go around saying that shit later. So let's double check with a scientist. I'm sure it's like a quick email and just make sure that we have the right stone, okay? And then I'm basically gonna let this movie run. But at the end, when all the dragons come back, because I am sure that I do not have the budget to change all the music, I am going to bring back the theme song. It's already recorded. And if I can't make just a pure instrumental, I am playing it with the singing. But I am going to bring that back because that is the best song and it's the best scene while you're seeing all the flights of the dragons, which is in the fucking song. And I'm bringing them back. And then the only thing other that I am changing is the reunion. You know what? No, I hated it, but I'm going to let it fly. I'm going to let Melisandre leave and join him because it's a classic fairy tale, even though I think it's kind of not cool for her to give up magic for him when she didn't really know him all that well. And she was like unconscious for most of the movie. But you know what? I'm going to let it ride because I'm going to let it be classic boy gets girl. Fine. I'm going to leave that alone. But I do it under duress and protest slightly. But I don't know how to end the movie elsewise.
I will say, in terms of the trade-off for her coming to the real world, like 1982 Boston, there's a lot of stuff for her to appreciate that she was not getting there. For one thing, showers. For another, like movies. Like there's some good stuff.
Indoor plumbing is worth it, but we don't know that the Land of Magic did not have a way of taking care of that.
That's true. All she needs is a prestidigitation cantrip and she's good.
Right, exactly. Like, all I'm saying is she's like left the world of magic and then she went to Boston.
Wait.
I've lived in Boston. It's That's also coming from a New Yorker. I'm sorry, Bob. Go on.
I'm just saying that, like, she certainly is getting something in the trade. It's not like a straight downgrade. The magic world she's in is not, it's not like Everon, where it's like, oh yeah, well, obviously, like, I would take floating discs over elevators any day, but
Fair enough. Yeah, you're right. They couldn't bring back a dragon and an ogre, so I guess you're right. Boston's fine.
again, I'm not saying it's necessarily the right choice, but I'm saying that, like, I could see being excited. Like, she's like, for her, it's like, oh, it's just her house dragon. So it is like, some of the stuff is kind of mundane, and it's like, fucking trains, those are awesome. And like, I agree, trains are awesome.
But I'm saying this from like a human aspect, right? Like, okay, you're saying from like advantages, but she's like leaving behind her friends and her family, which she'll never be able to see again, for someone that she barely knows at all.
I am just playing Amadon's advocate right now. So
Okay. I'm just saying from like a logical, because we love logic in this movie, a logical standpoint, this is not a decision that I would encourage a child of mine to make. Although I do appreciate that it was her decision to make, at the very least.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm going to let it fly, because they did make it a point to say that she had to choose. She chose unwisely, but she did make a choice.
All right. So, Joe, who do you want to have go up next?
I'll go next. Mainly because I'm not going to be nearly as nice, probably.
I don't let Case go first either because he's so detailed. That's why I don't let him go before.
Oh, no. I don't have a huge amount of detail, but there are some things that I definitely would do differently. I would completely obliterate that first scene with the water wheel. There's better ways to...
You would take a water wheel to the water wheel scene.
I would start the film at the meeting, personally. And I would also remove the blue and the golden wizard. It would just be Amadon. It would just be Carolinas. Because I have a really strong feeling that they added those two wizards for 80s inclusivity reasons. It just reeked of tokenism to me.
Yeah.
Especially the yellow wizard.
Golden. They call him Gould.
Wizard, yeah.
But
Yeah, like very Asian stereotype wizard there.
Mhm.
But it's not that like he's the only one, because even Carolina's like, my wife was like, is he a Jewish stereotype?
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not sure.
He does give off that vibe. You
Also,
know?
just his Rankin Bass animation that like all the characters like have kind of, like, we never talked about Giles. Like
No, we didn't talk about
the
Giles.
quote-unquote elf,
Yeah.
who really is more of like a hobbit halfling type character.
I mean,
but like,
I kind of dig it when elves don't always look super pretty, you know, because there's lots of Hilda
it's
folk
just,
and
it was
stuff.
like in terms of like what it looked, what he looked
Absolutely.
like and his role.
Mhm.
But I don't know.
Oh, for sure.
Not the point. And there's a reason we didn't talk about him. There's nothing really to say.
Yeah, and that's another issue that I'll go about. But yeah, I would start it with just Carolinas and Amadon talking to each other, and they could be, say, scrying over their world, looking at how technology is infringing upon their world, how it's causing magic to die. We could see that scene of, say, if it's in their world, it's like a tanner, and the chemicals that go into tanning leaking into the water, killing off the ducks and the pixies that are hanging out with it. Or they could just they could use that scrying bowl in front of them for that whole scene where they're showing how man's like starting to rip apart nature and how it's infringing upon their world. And they can kind of go back and forth about why we need magic to stay in the world and we need to protect it, because if they don't have magic and if we don't keep it safe, then they won't be inspired and they won't further their own goals and become better as a species. And Amadon's just say like, no, I'll do you one better. I'm just going to cause them great fear and greed and hate, and they'll destroy themselves, and then we won't have to worry about our land disappearing because it'll be the only land left. And you know that they can't fight each other, so he assembles the team, basically. So Caroline's will go and consult antiquity, and he'll go into time. I would change Peter's character a bit. I would kind of go a little bit more Ferngully in this route. I would make him kind of like an environmental activist who just kind of plays D&D in his off time. He's making his own little fantasy world. And because in his head, he wants a world that is safe and more environmentally friendly. He's constantly at odds. He could be a geologist. There's no reason why, you know.
Yeah, I love that. Ferngully is amazing. Go on.
Yeah. That would be kind of where he comes on. He understands, you know, he has a science background, but he's also just trying to make the world a better place. So he's trying to design maybe say some sort of filtration system or something to make irrigation better or something along those lines. And he gets his inspiration from fantasy like ideas. Not really sure how to pull him in other than how they do it, where they're just like, Acorn, yoink, you're here. Yeah, that's kind of how I would change his character. Instead of just being like a kind of just down on his luck dude in a pawn shop, or Carolinas could just talk to him when he meets him saying, listen, you're right. Fantasy is kind of real. And if it's not around for us to inspire you, it's going to be a downward spiral, and everything you're fighting for is going to be for naught. But you could help us if you come with us. And so then he heads off with him. Obviously, I'd have to change where he gets the gifts from, because he's no longer getting it from those two wizards. But that's as simple enough as just, it could be a gift from Smeargle because he's not coming on the quest. So you can have these from my horde. Here's a magic shield that, blocks magic attacks. And here's a magic flute that does flute things you don't get to know. We don't tell you. Just use it when the time's right.
Or just antiquity itself could give it.
Yeah,
could bestow
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would get the quest going a little bit quicker. I would keep Melisande, but every single female character would get a bit more screen time. They would get more lines. They would be fleshed out a lot more, because at the moment they're like one or two steps above property, and that wasn't cool.
Narrator at the most.
Yeah. I was like, they need more. Let's give them more.
Princess Melisande kind of feels like Princess Arlan from Dune to a certain
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 100%. As far as the quest goes, I like it. I don't have much complaints in that regard. It's just kind of how they get the ball rolling. I would be more careful with the throwaway signs, not the stuff that like they shine a light on, but it's the little bits here and there. But that's just because even like 5-year-old me watching this would have pointed those things out, because I was a complete dweeb and it would bother me. So if I'm making this, I'm not going to let it bother me. I'll get a consultant. I would borrow more from The Dragon and the George, because in that there's at least a character, like a love interest for Sir Orin that he has history with, that's currently being held captive by another evil knight. Maybe like before he can help them with that, he has to kind of like, they have to go save them. And, he could still be this chivalrous person. You can still get that ideal across, but it doesn't have to be towards a 5-year-old.
Yeah. Hell, I mean, even if he just knew Danielle beforehand.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They had repartee,
Yeah, if they had, they could have had a history too. Why not? And it would have been really nice if everybody was like, who, him, that man that did that. And he would have been like, that's no man. And then she comes out,
Yeah. Yeah, even Danielle just being like, I've heard about you for centuries. It was like, oh, no, you sound like you're way too young for him. So make them old friends, and that makes it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of my father knew you, it's like you could have like sort of a game of them being like who owes who at the moment. And like it's only when they're like even that they're allowed to like actually court.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, oh, you owe me again, Orin. Like, after she saves him, it's a great.
Yeah, I believe.
Yeah, like his chivalry won't allow him to like make a move until like he is no longer in her debt or something to that effect.
Right.
And so like he has to save her from something later on, but like it has to be big enough that it's like, oh, that counts for 2. Oh, it does it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah, you can make like them like in other altercations later on where like they save each other's lives to kind of go back and forth. Like, oh, now that one's for me. Like, now we're even. No, says you.
Yeah, and then you've got quality flirting there.
Yeah. Some good quality.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like the Gimli Legolas level flirting, but without having to pretend that they're just friends.
Oh yes, absolutely. The quest for the most part can stay the same. We can add a bit where they're going off to save his love interest or not, or there's more that could have been done on the quest. I feel, like I said, the bones of the movie are good, so I don't really have to alter too much. I would keep obviously the bar scene because drunk dragons are so much fun.
It's hilarious. It's the best scene.
But I would flesh out the characters more, because a lot of them are very like Giles is there to play the flute. You think Danielle would be there to shoot some arrows, but apparently she's just there to die, because that's all she really does after saving them the one time.
She does shoot an arrow into the acidic muck, which the whole time I'm like, why are you like when she's like wasted arrow, I'm like, throw a rock.
Yeah, throw a rock. throw any other organic anything.
There's a stick somewhere.
I'm sure they could find a stick.
I think the worst part is that she's like, throw an arrow. Why would we waste it? They're like, do it. And she's like, okay.
Pretty much.
Instead of be like, why would I waste an arrow? And then pick up a stick or anything else she had on her and throw it in there.
Absolutely.
Danielle, you have the power over your arrows.
Mm-hmm.
We promise.
And another thing, maybe a third of the way through the film, why do the gifts become Greek all of a sudden?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that, but that's really weird.
Like the flute becomes the flute of Olympus. It had a different name prior to that. And the shield of Saturn was like a cosmic thing because that was supposed to be like the cosmic wizard. I mean, they could have just been, there's been fantasy stuff. Like just make something up. You know, I know they don't want to do that because the movie's so logical, but in this regard, they could have made something up, make it sound a little bit, they didn't have to just pull from Greek mythology badly.
Yeah. Like there's two ways to look at that. One is that if you do see this as like still the board game that he created, you could see this from the perspective of a DM just forgetting what they had named it earlier and being like, oh, it's my notes are fucked up. Or it's the world itself becoming more like trapped into like the modern world or like as magic's kind of disrupting it. But like this isn't a surreal enough kind of movie for that to be the reality. So clearly what we're just looking at is that the script had clearly a draft. And then someone took another pass, and then someone didn't note all the changes. Like the Control F didn't work.
Oops. The ending, I would alter a bit. Like the weird rap battle he has at the end was kind of weird, like where he's just saying the different ologies and it's murdering.
Yeah, that was weird.
I feel like he could be trying to like almost using like a different version of his evil spell from before, where he's just trying to like put down how powerful he is and how there's no way he can defeat him because he's Olmadon and he's this massive thing. And instead of just being like actuallying him, just talk to him about how like, you know, the only reason why you're as powerful as you are is because we exist in order to take inspiration from you. Everything that he throws that's negative, he'll be like, well, magic is hope and magic is inspiring. Kind of play off of that a little bit more, but I might just have to throw it all out and just have like maybe he just picks up that badass sword and monologues and chucks it at him like he saw Orin do.
Yeah.
The ending is just kind of a little messy for me, personally.
He just throws like, you know, Kleenex at him and he just dissolves.
Yeah.
No, you're clean.
By the power of pedantry, I smite thee.
Post-epic battle, I would probably keep the story from The Dragon and the George, where he stays instead of leaves. Because if he stays there and helps cultivate this world with magic, he can then use that to inspire better thinking and better, you know, ecologically minded, you know, science in his other world. That's kind of how I would do it. And then, you know, he could stay and actually get to know Melisande and, you know, foster
that's way better.
A better relationship.
I like that.
It's mainly the two ends. The middle was fine for me.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if he stayed, like, then he can't be Peter Dickinson, which I'm not saying is necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
But if the idea is that he wrote the book, he does have to go back, or at least have the way to go back. But he also could just say that the door isn't permanently shut.
Yeah. He could have fixed things enough that it doesn't have to be permanently shut. You know?
Yeah, you could introduce some kind of concept of like, here is like a doorknob that if you put it on a door, it will let you walk back into the cabin or something like that.
Or like, if he isn't specifically in my version, the one that writes the book, we can then see like a young Peter getting inspired by dragons in a world that's a bit more environmentally friendly and just, or, you know, has like that bit, instead of it being bogged down, like when we do see Peter earlier, or like our protagonist earlier, make sure everything looks gray and dirty, kind of smoggy, kind of like gnarly, as far as like, because like 80s era metropolitan areas were pretty kind of grimy. They're polluted. Like there's a, you know, it's hard to tell, but we have come quite a bit of a way from since then to have cleaner cities and whatnot. You know, we're still a long way to go. We have made some pretty big leaps going from seeing his Boston where it was kind of mucky and you could see why he's fighting, to then at the end of the movie showing a young Peter, an environment that's a little bit less so, where he has more time to just daydream and be inspired and think about why would dragons, you know, be able to fly.
Yeah. Or to like add on to you, like, and double back a little bit, or you do let Peter go back, right? But when you go back to see him, he's not in any like pawn shop, but he's like in a bookstore signing things, like signing his book. And someone walks through and goes to sign his book, and it's Melisandre. And she figured out how to open a door to the world.
Mm.
And when they're done, she says, "Come with me." And she places her hand, and with her magic, she opens the door, and he's allowed to go back. And the two of them can cross back and forth together.
Heck
And
yeah.
that way you expand her role a little bit, and you allow for him to still be the author of the book.
Having him have access to come back, especially like him having like an environmental bent, I think that gives purpose on his side of things, because the science versus magic component of this all is very muddled. The opening is like, oh, science is destroying all magic, but then magic is like the thing that's like the bad guy in this whole movie, but also is kind of the reason that we'll eventually have atom bombs, so it's not like magic is making humanity bad and humanity is not corrupting magic. It's just like, well, Almadon's kind of just a douchebag. That's the plot of this movie. And like the bigger theme of like science versus magic is almost kind of like the background tension that causes like this one guy to be an asshole outside of it, but like he himself is just a symptom and not the cause. And they don't address the cause in this all. It's just like, well, fuck this guy. That's all.
Yeah. Fuck him and his pointy hat.
Yeah. Let's go back to our war of magic and science and have two separate worlds, like a 2-state solution.
Yeah.
And end up with just like fucking dealing with this one asshole. All right. Fuck him. It's just not quite there.
There was a line in it that I kind of get, is where at one point I think he says inevitability is the most powerful magic. And that, I guess, what they're trying to do, at least from Carolinus's perspective, is inevitably there's going to come a point where magic is not really going to factor in too much, and we might lose it if we don't protect it, because we still need that little bit of magic to spark ideas and to spark the creative process. And kind of like the human world doesn't understand that because they have no connection to it. They don't realize that they're kind of Ouroborosing their own technology there by disallowing magic and kind of removing it completely. And he understands that inevitably that's going to happen if we don't do something about it. And Almadon just has the opposite idea. They both have two different root problems. For Carolinus, it's more, we need to protect what we have. We need to conserve, conservationally minded, the magic. Almadon kind of sees humanity as more of an invasive species, and it needs to be scrubbed out. So he's going to use his dark magic to get them to destroy themselves. Different ways to look at that. But the root problem is not so much what you have, but how you use it.
It's wild. This movie came out the same year as The Wall. And that would have been so wild if they could have just gone full adult, like trippy, like have the realm of magic be like very dreamy, and, like ethereal and changing. And then you could have really like kind of leaned into the sort of like, well, magic bleeds in from sort of like the dream time kind of aspect of it all,
For sure.
It's only a few years before we would be getting like things like The Sandman, where we're really starting to like lean into that kind of like, well, fantasy magic doesn't have to be just a different place. It could be a different perspective. And that would be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think I have very similar notes to both of you in that, like, well, for one thing, the opening scene doesn't need to happen.
I'm glad we were all in concert with that. We all agree.
Now, the way I would open it, because I think you have a good thought on in terms of like opening with like the council meeting. I was thinking like you could just open it with Peter, and then have him get sucked in, and then you have a viewpoint character, and you can do flashbacks to kind of show all the stuff. Like the movie's not averse to flashbacks, so fuck it, you could just do it that way, and then that way you're with the viewpoint character the whole time, and you can kind of like set up some of those things. I think that the setting doesn't need to be the past the way it is. Like it is presented as a past, but it's a past that has yet to have magic stripped from it, so it's already kind of a different reality anyway. It could just be like a fantasy sidestep and like humanity is bleeding into it. You could have sort of that element there, and then that puts some of the stakes a little bit more, because like Peter's from a future, like, so Peter, we know, like Almadon loses, like in a certain sense.
Yeah,
like,
kind of.
He can't help but lose because we know that the future is that way. So Peter doesn't really have stakes for it all, in that it is presented as being like literally a thing that is already preordained to not occur that way, unless there was a Back to the Future style, like, well, Almadon's like succeeding, and so like Peter is having trouble. Maybe that's why he's like bonded to the dragon, if they set up something like that. So I think like if it's more of a separate space, that would be kind of an interesting element. And you could have it be where it's like a Flash of Two Worlds type scenario where the thoughts of it are bleeding in, and that's why he creates the game the way it is. So that like it's not literally he's trapped in a D&D setting, but the game that he was building is him like feeling the resonance of this magical world, and that can sort of be an explanation for like the impact that magic has on our world that you could kind of explore. But like aside from thinking that like, oh well, they're wasting the opportunity to have an audience insert character that we are introduced to like a third of the way into the movie, wouldn't it be better just to start there and and then like catch everyone up on like this other magical world, as opposed to starting at this other magical world and then spending a good amount of time there and then being like, well, what about the fucking guy from Boston?
Oh yeah, exactly.
like well, get there faster, definitely faster.
Yes.
Like whether or not it's like starts immediately, or we, you know, because you could do a Luke Skywalker type scenario of like, we've got a little bit of time with the weirdness, but we don't go too deep on it. It's just like, here's like the really like the shorthand for like bad guys, good guys, etc. And then we get like more of an explanation once we get to our protagonist. Like also fine. So you could start with that council the same way. But either way, we need to get into it sooner because we spend so much time at the start of the movie in this weird setting. And also the dumbest fucking stakes in the beginning. And then we get into the real ones. So, so cut out that whole front. Get to us having Peter as our character that we're with much, much faster. I prefer to have it not be specifically the past, and I would rather just like start with him and he gets explained everything and we can see in flashbacks, all yada, yada, yada. But then like the actual like plot, I don't have a lot of like notes about because I thought it was mostly fine. Like once they're on the quest, that's mostly fine. We just need to get to that quest a little bit faster and like have less child rape kind of vibes going on. Like that's not good. It's icky. Don't do it. But you know, at that point then you can have, if the setting itself is like very much like our world, but like shifted over to like the realm of dreams and thought, you can end with sort of the same kind of happy ending that they want to get to and have it not be necessarily quite so gross, because it could be that Melisande has a representation in our world, or that he sees her in his dreams, and like that's the relationship that they have at the end of it all. Yeah. I think it supports the library of books that haven't been written yet. I think that's like a cool scenario. Here's the section of all the books that haven't been written, because it's more of a dream time kind of environment. I think those are all pretty cool. And that Peter's way of applying science and logic to it is why he's able to create the board game in the first place, I think could be kind of an element there. It would be really fun if this was made 10 years later and D&D or something like it could be actually like kind of attached to it, but it's a little too early in the public. Like the public's aware that there are fantasy board games and tabletop RPGs, but the public isn't like aware of the ubiquitous rules of it all.
Yeah, early 80s, I think it would still be kind of, they'll still have that Satanic Panic vibe.
I think it's even before like the Satanic Panic really like revved up at that point. But either way, like it's still, no one's going to recognize like a 20-sided die. No, that's not for the lay person. So, you know, kind of roll with it, being like, okay, he is a person who's interpreting this magical realm that is just outside of ours. He wants to write a book about it. He's making board games about it. It's like he is already in touch with it all, but he's able to put structure in a way that people inside that realm don't, because they are part of this like chaotic flurry of right brain thoughts. And he is able to take fantasy and interpret it through a left brain kind of lens, using that sort of like parlance. That is why he is able to still have fantasy in his life, whereas like a lot of adults lose fantasy as they grow up because they are actively suppressing it. So you can kind of get this like vibe of like, well, what is childish wonder as an adult? Like, how do you keep it? And the way you keep it is that you embrace it, but you don't give into it. Like, you're still able to be a functional adult who is able to like look at the world through a lens of logic and reason, but still appreciate the wonder of it all.
Absolutely.
And I think like having like an environmental bent to the character outside of that, I think you could still keep that in there. Like that could be an active consideration that he has. Certainly in terms of like the type of entertainments would be like something that's like less environmentally wasteful than like TV and movies and stuff like that. But whatever, I think it's like perfectly fine to have him be like all excited about that all. I do actually really like the conversation of the end being like, all right, well, here's how your magic wouldn't work because of science. But I also agree that like it's weird that he's just rattling off like science concepts without it necessarily having like have them be like counterpoints to it. Like if you're gonna get into it, like E equals MC squared, have that be in response to like a magic like energy kind of thing. Like have every part of it like be juxtaposed on it. Like I will create a fire in space. It's like, well, but that's a vacuum. Like, you know, like have every part of it be a direct competition between each other.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's where he's like kind of breaking down from the fantasy, and that's why he's sort of like ousted from it all. But then he is still in the waking world able to suspend disbelief when he chooses. And maybe that's even how he's able to return back to that realm at the end. So you could still have like the happy ending with Melisande.
Definitely.
and maybe not have everyone come back from the dead, although they have established that they can do that. So like it's not really that big of a MacGuffin when the wizards are already pretty capable of having everyone come back. So I don't know about that. Because it is like pretty gnarly that everyone is dead by the end of the movie.
Like, oh crap,
like,
they're all dead.
And like even Peter, like he manifests in like kind of an astral form. Like you could have him be a little bit more ghostly, and like when he sort of fades away too. I don't want to change it too much at the end because I do like the like here's logic versus someone trying to like explain like I'll pluck the sun out of the sky. I think that's like fucking great.
Oh yeah, definitely. I get that.
I think that's where it just like needs a little bit more nuancing in terms of like all the different specific things they say so that there is this sort of counterbalance to it. Like, so here is magic fantasy concept. Here is response being shut down by logic. And like piece by piece, he's like breaking the magic that Omadon has.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That would have definitely been a better end situation for sure.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And then, yeah, like, I mean, obviously better soundtrack would be cool. Having it be like, just like super fucking Bostonian would be great. I really want, like, I didn't think about this until we started this call, but I really want to do like the Flight of Dragons abridged and like really lean into it. Like you could even have the two dragons drunk in the basement, like tell the story.
Oh, for
like,
sure.
In, like hardcore, like Bostonian accent.
That sounds like fun.
Sounds like wicked fun.
It'd be so wicked fun. Go Pats.
You know who's a traitor? Brady. Go on. I'm sorry.
Like there's a ton of space for that in this movie. I think the animation, while it's definitely cheap, or like they're definitely cutting corners, I should say, it's beautiful at spots, and a lot of the character design is great. I love a lot of the line work on the characters. Like Danielle's hair looks so good every time like she's on screen, and she doesn't have like thick black lines for it. Like it has this ethereal quality to it all. Like those are all great. But like, man, fuck Giles. Like you can just forget he was there, and then like because he's even introduced in the same scene with Danielle, and then like doesn't really do anything with it all. So why even fucking bother? But he's there because he's in the books, and
he's got to play the flute.
I also find her kiss to him condescending. I just want to say, like, as a person who has a lot of short friends, they don't really like being patted on the head or treated like a child.
That's true.
So
I think that the opening is weak, and I think that the ending could have been made a little bit more cogent, but not necessarily a different structure for it. And I think that the overall movie, once, you know, trim a bunch of the scenes, but like overall flows pretty well because it's just a D&D quest, pretty straightforward. So I'm not really that annoyed by it. So I really like this movie still. I came away from it very happy. But again, this is exactly the kind of movie that I'm like, oh yeah, well yeah, totally. I would be that annoying person in the fantasy setting being like, well, how does this part work with the science? Because I am me and I know who I am.
Yeah, I'm glad you embrace it.
Oh yeah.
I'm proud to know you. Despite it. No, because of it. Because of it.
I try to use it for good.
You do.
That's what the show is. That's what the show is. But yeah, so I feel like we're all kind of on the same page, which is the movie just needs to start sooner and like trim out some of the dead weight scenes. And it could have used another scripting pass, but like I think that some of the concerns about like the tone weren't going to really be fixed at this time when it came out. Like that's just where it is. And the cast itself is solid.
Just be more accurate.
Yeah.
With the facts that you're putting out there. Science stuff. Water wheels do not cause pollution. Thanks.
Right.
They also don't cause suction. It wouldn't pull the damn duck in. The duck could just swim away.
Like I could understand getting stuck under the like the paddle of the water wheel once, but it's it's not the wheel, it's the river.
Yeah, the river is pushing the wheel.
It's like, oh, the nature of the river, like because it's effectively the same shit as just like hitting a rock when you're just like floating. Like,
it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I'm too much of a nerd. I was like, now it's jarring. Now.
Because like when I was watching it, it's the same thing as like the 747 bit where I'm like, okay, well, I guess they got stuck under it. But the problem isn't the water wheel. The problem was that the swan wasn't paying attention and the current was too fast. Like,
yeah, it's those gosh darn fairies. They were probably drunk driving that swan around.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that's what they always do. Get high on some nectar, get on an animal, right into the wrong place.
Wouldn't it be
back in
Please
fantasy
don't come
Boston?
for me,
Yeah,
fairies.
wouldn't it be
Thank God I
wicked
lived in
sweet if
Manhattan.
we just made this goose go in this fucking water wheel?
Yeah. So I think we're all kind of on similar pages, and really just the sort of the takeaway is like, well, where does it fall as is for us in terms of like how strong? Like Sam's a hard 5. I'm probably like an 8, frankly. Joe, I'm kind of hearing a 6 for you. Is that about right?
Yeah, I'd say 6 is pretty. Yeah, I would still put it on and just kind of just look away when the stuff that bothers me comes on.
Yeah.
Like honestly, if it was on, like let's say it came on like cable, like I had the TV on and it came on, and I was like doing laundry or something, leave it on.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, because it's got those one-liners that when you hear it, you're like, yeah.
try to get to a couple of key points. Try to get to a couple of amazing characters,
Mm-hmm.
and then turn it off right before the end. Just made the wrong decision.
Like once they're all dead, the turn off. Like that's how it ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
The world is saved.
Oh, well.
Everyone's dead, but the world is saved.
No, like
Yeah.
I just turned to my son. That's why we have all this pollution and we have global warming because we lost.
Ramadan won.
Ramadan won. I hope you're happy.
Yeah. When Gorbash goes down because of the dragon spell thing, but before Peter comes up, that's when it's just like you just cut the
Yep, hard
credits.
cut.
And now all the dragons are sleeping, and that's why we have no magic, and that's why you have to do homework. So go do your homework.
Yeah. So I'm really glad to rewatch this. Like, there are certainly a bunch of flaws in this movie, and some of those are kind of unavoidable. And again, we don't have any information for why they decided to combine two completely separate properties by two authors that have similar fucking names.
Right? Maybe it was an accident where they wrote a name
Maybe
down.
it was just that, man.
And then they're like, you got the wrong book. Oh, shit. We got to get the other book now. We got to use both books now. We already sent checks
the
to them
license
both.
was Gordon. The license was Peter Dickinson's. You read the book by Gordon Dixon. Jesus Christ. Well, I guess we have to. What did the lawyers say? Well, we've changed all the names. Oh, okay, cool. We're good.
Yeah.
God, maybe that was the scenario.
Oh, it could be.
Who knows? We'll never know. It's locked in the world of magic. We'll never know.
You know who actually probably could find out, though? Sam Wilson. She has animator
maybe.
friends
Ooh.
and probably could. She could probably find an oral history by doing some digging. It's obviously well before her time, but she might know a person who might know a person. So Sam Wilson, out there in space. I know you don't listen to this actively. So when Pat Edwards listens to this episode and talks to Sam Wilson, he should then twist her arm and force her to like find this stuff out. Because I also know that Brett's probably not listening to this actively either, unless he happened to have seen this movie, in which case he would, because he listens to the episodes that he like cares about the movie. So
We're asking a person who knows a person, even though we technically know these people, to ask a person who they may know, who might be able to give us an oral history of when that happened. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. I love it.
But either way, I'm really glad to look at this again. I'm really glad just to like talk about another like straightforward, like very goofy fantasy kind of thing. It's at worst inoffensive, aside from like the child grooming stuff.
Yeah.
Like even the music's like not great, but it's like whatever. Like
it's just kind of
it's not Return to the King.
No, it's not.
It's cringy at best, right? Like at the worst, rather. It's like, that doesn't sit quite well. Like it's not the worst we've been through, but there's cringe there.
Yeah. But overall, I really enjoyed looking at it again. And again, it's mercifully short and the designs are good. And I think if you want to watch a fantasy thing with a child who is like me, I think you're in great shape. I think you should go do that.
Definitely.
Joe, thank you for bringing this. Where can people find you online? Like, what have you got going on?
If you want to look for me online, I'm on Twitter at aren't the droids for you. I don't really have a whole lot to put out at the moment, but in hopefully the short future, me and a couple friends of ours are putting together a Pathfinder 2nd Edition actual play. It's going to be called the Dice Training Podcast, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Wonderful.
Nice. Well, as soon as that goes live, we'll be sure to update the links on the episode descriptions when it does. But it's been a pleasure, and it's always fun to like chat with you on Twitter, but also on our Discord, where you can interact with all of us at Certain POV, including Sam. So Sam, I just said they can find you on the Discord sometimes.
Yeah.
But where else can they find you?
Yeah, sometimes I remember the Discord exists, and they can definitely find me here at Another Pass. But other than that, I am busy trying to take over a dragon's body, especially after I saw this movie. So you will not be able to reach me because I am actively attempting to live out my life's dream of becoming a dragon. And so if you have any complaints about anything I said today or in previous episodes, I mean, it's fine. You can find Case to complain to him at.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken or at our Discord server. You can find me on Instagram at Quetzalcoatl5 because I'm holding on to that damn AIM screen name from high school for dear life.
As you should.
If you really are mad about the full cow that Sam ate of yours, please, by all means, come find me at any of these places, but especially the Discord server because it's become a very...
I'm not sorry about the cow.
Yeah, I know. And
I'm not. It was delicious.
I'm sure it was.
I'm coming for your sheep next.
Yeah, come to the Discord server. We're having a great amount of conversations. We have modified the old Scruffy Nerf Herders channel. Actually, at Joe's suggestion, we kind of came to it together while we were chatting into just a broader TTRPG conversation, and that's become really rich, especially with like things like the D&D movie, with things like 1D&D, if that's like what's going on, or if it's now going to be 5.5, or if it's just going to be called 5th edition because Wizards of the Coast is backpedaling like crazy at the moment for stuff. If you want to talk about Pathfinder stuff, that's great stuff there. Or if you want to talk about other nerdy things, we have a vibrant video game conversation going on. We've got tons of music conversations. We've got so many cool things happening at the Discord server without it being crazy overwhelming. Like there are plenty of Discord servers I have been to that I cannot follow what's happening because I will have said something. I will go to the bathroom, and when I come back, I will have to scroll for 10 minutes to find the thing that I had said. So that is not the pace that we have. We have a pace that is much more manageable with a lot of really friendly people, like the three of us on this call. And also our editor, Jeff, who I love more than Sam.
No, that is a lie. That is a bold-faced lie. I love Jeff way more than Case. Jeff is aware of it. Matt's aware of it. The entire world is aware of it. How dare you, Case? I'm going to eat your cow.
What's not to love about Jeff?
You can find us at the Discord server. You can find a link to that Discord server at certainpov.com, where you can find full episodes of this show and tons of other great shows, such as our bonus episodes that we're doing where we're looking back on our old episodes. But when you want to check out new content and find out what is up next, Sam, what have we got coming up on the next episode?
Next time on Another Pass, we'll be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Elisea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Jeff Moonen. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan. And I had a very similar.
I'm going to let that love like just trail because I felt the fear that just hit you when I said that word.
No, it's fine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.